The courtroom doors swung open with a sound that cut through the heavy silence like a blade. Victor Langford walked in, shoulders back, chin high, his $1,000 suit catching the fluorescent lights just right. He moved like a man who owned the world because, in his mind, he did. His lawyers flanked him, expensive leather briefcases in hand, their faces carved from confidence. The gallery was packed. Reporters, onlookers, people who'd come to watch a billionaire fight his way out of trouble the way billionaires always did, with money, power, and threats wrapped in legal speak. Victor's eyes swept the room with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. He'd been in situations like this before. Accusations, lawsuits, angry tenants, and bitter former business partners trying to drag him down. They always failed. Always. Because Victor Langford didn't lose. But then his gaze landed on someone sitting in the gallery, and his entire body went rigid. A young woman. Brown hair pulled back. Simple navy dress. Hands folded in her lap. Her face calm, almost serene, but her eyes, those eyes carried something Victor hadn't expected to see here. Recognition. And something deeper. Something that made his throat go tight. He blinked. Once. Twice. His mind scrambled, reaching back through weeks of forgotten faces and discarded moments, until it landed on a memory he'd tossed aside like trash. The coffee shop. The rainy morning. The barista. His breathing hitched. What was she doing here? Victor. His lead attorney, Marcus, leaned in close, his voice a low hiss. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Victor couldn't answer. His mouth had gone dry. The woman in the gallery didn't move, didn't smile, didn't react. She just sat there, watching him with those steady, unshakable eyes. The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. All rise for the Honorable Judge Rafael Moreno. The crowd stood as one, the rustle of fabric and shuffling of feet filling the air. Victor's legs moved on instinct, but his eyes stayed locked on the woman. His mind raced. Who was she? Why was she here? And why did her presence feel like a noose tightening around his neck? The judge entered from the side door, black robes flowing, his face stern and weathered like carved stone. Judge Rafael Moreno. Victor had heard the name before, impossible not to in legal circles. The man was a legend. Incorruptible. Unbendable. The kind of judge you didn't want if you had something to hide. And Victor had plenty to hide. The judge took his seat, his gavel resting beside his hand like a weapon waiting to strike. His eyes scanned the courtroom with the calm authority of a man who'd seen every trick, every lie, every desperate plea 1,000 times before. Then his gaze flickered, just for a heartbeat, toward the woman in the gallery. Victor's stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. The whispers started then. Soft at first, like wind through dry leaves, but growing louder. People leaning toward each other, hands cupped over mouths, eyes darting between the judge, the woman, and Victor himself. Did you see that? Is that? Wait, isn't she? Victor's lawyer grabbed his arm, pulling him down into his seat with more force than necessary. Victor, what the hell is going on? Who is that woman? Victor's lips barely moved. His voice came out strangled, barely a whisper. The barista. Marcus blinked. What? The barista, Victor repeated, his voice cracking now, panic bleeding through his carefully maintained armor. From the coffee shop. A few weeks ago. He stopped himself, but the memory crashed over him anyway. His shouting. Her quiet dignity. The crumpled bill he'd thrown on the counter, like she was beneath him. People like you waste oxygen. Oh God. What had he done? Marcus's face went pale. Victor, tell me you didn't. But he didn't need to finish. The truth was written all over Victor's face. The judge cleared his throat, and the courtroom fell into instant silence. When Rafael Moreno spoke, his voice carried the weight of iron wrapped in velvet. We're here today to address the case of Henderson Properties versus Langford Enterprises. Allegations of breach of contract, fraud, and... Victor barely heard the words. His eyes were still on the woman. She hadn't moved. Hadn't flinched. Just sat there like a statue of quiet judgment, her presence somehow louder than any scream. And then she did something that made Victor's blood run cold. She smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not a triumphant one. Just a small, knowing curve of her lips that said everything without saying anything at all. You remember me now, don't you? The judge continued speaking, outlining the case, setting the stage for battle. But Victor couldn't focus. His empire, his reputation, his entire life was about to be picked apart in this courtroom, and sitting in the gallery was the girl he'd humiliated over a cup of coffee. The girl he dismissed as nothing. The girl who was, somehow, connected to the one man in this building who couldn't be bought, threatened, or intimidated. His lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, something about procedure and opening statements, but Victor's mind was elsewhere. Spinning. Crashing. Burning. How? How is this possible? Around him, the whispers grew louder. Phones appeared in hands, discreetly angled to capture photos. The reporters in the back row were already typing furiously, their fingers flying across keyboards. This wasn't just a trial anymore. This was a story. And Victor Langford, the man who'd spent his entire life controlling the narrative, suddenly realized he'd lost control completely. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Let's begin. Victor gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the panic and the pride and the crumbling walls of his carefully built empire, a single thought screamed louder than all the rest. What if she's not just here to watch? What if she's here because she knows something I don't? The woman in the gallery, Clara, though Victor didn't know her name yet, sat perfectly still. Her father, the judge, shuffled papers on his bench. The lawyers began their opening arguments. And Victor Langford, billionaire, CEO, untouchable king of his own world, felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. Have you ever insulted someone only to realize too late they held more power than you ever imagined? Drop your answer in the comments below. But this was only the beginning. Because what Victor didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the girl sitting in that courtroom wasn't just a barista. She was the daughter of the man who would decide his fate. And her silence? It wasn't weakness. It was the quiet before the storm. Victor Langford wasn't born a monster. That's the thing most people forget when they see men like him, polished, cold, untouchable. Somewhere along the way, there was a version of Victor who smiled without calculation, who shook hands without measuring their worth in dollars. But that version died young. He grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in a neighborhood where ambition was the only ticket out. His father worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on. His mother cleaned houses for families who wouldn't look her in the eye. Victor watched them break themselves into pieces for crumbs, and he made a promise in the dark of his childhood bedroom. He would never be powerless again. So he clawed his way up. Scholarships. Student loans that would take decades to pay off. 80-hour work weeks while his classmates partied. He graduated top of his class, landed a job at a real estate firm, and within 5 years, he'd bought the company out from under his own boss. That's when the change happened. When Victor realized something that would shape the rest of his life, people respected money more than kindness, power more than principles, fear more than fairness. And he became very good at all 3. Langford Enterprises rose like a skyscraper, steel and glass and ambition stacked so high you couldn't see the top. Real estate. Technology. Investments that turned millions into billions. Victor's face appeared on magazine covers. Business schools studied his strategies. Politicians answered his phone calls. But with every floor he climbed, he left pieces of his humanity behind. Employees learned not to make eye contact unless spoken to. Business partners discovered that contracts with Victor Langford came with hidden teeth. Tenants in his buildings found out that complaints disappeared into voicemail boxes that were never checked. Victor told himself it was necessary. That softness was weakness. That the world belonged to those who took it, not those who asked permission. He surrounded himself with people who said yes. Lawyers who bent rules like wire. Accountants who made numbers dance. A personal assistant who scheduled his life down to the minute and knew never to question his decisions. His penthouse overlooked Central Park, 47 floors up, where the noise of the city became a distant hum. He ate at restaurants where reservations required months of waiting, unless you were Victor Langford. He wore watches that cost more than most people's cars and ties that were hand-stitched in Italy. And he was alone. Not that Victor would admit it. Loneliness was for weak people. For people who needed others to feel complete. Victor had his empire. His billions. His name in headlines. What else could a man possibly need? But late at night, when the city lights blurred through his floor-to-ceiling windows and the whiskey in his glass was the only company he had, something hollow echoed in his chest. Something he refused to name. Pride, they say, is a hungry thing. It feeds on success until success isn't enough anymore. Then it demands more. And more. And more. Victor's pride had an appetite that could never be satisfied. He measured his worth in zeros on a bank statement. In the fear he saw in people's eyes when he entered a room. In the way doors opened before he even reached them, held by hands attached to people whose names he never bothered to learn. That's the thing about men who build empires on arrogance. They forget that empires are built on foundations. And foundations, no matter how deep, can crack. Would you trust someone who values money over people? Let us know in the comments. Victor's empire looked unshakable from the outside. But inside? Cracks were forming. Small at first. A tenant's lawsuit here. A disgruntled employee's complaint there. Whispers about contracts that weren't quite legal. Deals that skirted the line between aggressive and criminal. Victor crushed them all. Settlements with non-disclosure agreements. Threats disguised as legal warnings. Money thrown at problems until they disappeared. But you can't buy away everything forever. And on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before that courtroom door would swing open, Victor Langford made a mistake that money couldn't fix. He walked into a coffee shop and forgot that even the people he looked down on had names. Had lives. Had fathers who wore black robes and carried gavels. But arrogance is a crown that blinds the person wearing it. And Victor? He couldn't see the cliff he was walking toward. Clara Moreno learned about justice before she learned to read. She grew up in a modest house in Queens, where the kitchen smelled like her mother's cooking and her father's law books lined every wall. Judge Rafael Moreno wasn't just her father, he was her hero. The man who came home late, exhausted from days spent listening to people's pain, and still had energy to sit with her at the dinner table and ask about her day. Clara, he'd say, his voice warm like summer rain, tell me something good that happened today. And she would. Even on bad days, she'd find something. Because that's what her father taught her, to look for light even when darkness pressed close. Rafael Moreno was a man built from integrity. In a city where judges could be bought, where favors were currency and power meant compromise, he stood like a lighthouse. Unmovable. Unbendable. His reputation was spotless not because he was lucky, but because he chose honor over convenience every single day. Clara watched him make those choices. Watched him turn down invitations to exclusive parties because they came from lawyers with cases on his docket. Watched him drive a 15-year-old car while his colleagues showed up in luxury sedans. Watched him pore over case files at midnight, making sure every decision was fair, even when fairness was hard. The law, he told her once, when she was 12 and angry about a bully at school, isn't about making people happy. It's about making things right. And right isn't always popular, Mija. But it's always worth it. Those words carved themselves into Clara's heart. She decided young that she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. Wanted to stand in courtrooms and fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Wanted to wear that same look of quiet strength her father carried like armor. But Clara also understood something her father never had to learn, what it meant to be underestimated. She wasn't tall or loud or commanding. She had a soft voice and a gentle face. People looked at her and saw someone easy to dismiss. Someone forgettable. And instead of fighting that perception, Clara learned to use it. She enrolled in law school but kept it quiet. Told her classmates her last name was just Moreno, never mentioned the Judge Rafael part. She wanted to earn respect on her own merit, not ride her father's reputation like a shield. To pay her tuition and keep herself independent, She took a job at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Langford Tower. The pay was minimum wage. The hours were brutal. Her feet ached at the end of every shift, and she smelled like espresso and steamed milk no matter how many times she showered. But Clara didn't complain, because every late-night shift was another step toward her degree. Every rude customer was practice in keeping her composure. Every early morning was proof that she could work harder than anyone expected. Her coworkers liked her. She remembered regulars' orders, asked about their days, smiled even when exhaustion made her bones feel heavy. She became part of the furniture, reliable, steady, easy to overlook. And that's exactly what she wanted. Clara understood something that powerful people forget: the invisible have eyes. The dismissed have ears. The people you don't bother to notice see everything. She watched the executives who came in every morning, barking orders into phones, treating service workers like furniture. Watched the way they tipped or didn't. Watched the way they snapped fingers instead of saying please. Watched the way they looked through people instead of at them. And she learned. Not everyone was cruel, of course. Some customers were kind. Said thank you. Made eye contact. Treated her like a human being instead of a machine that dispensed caffeine. But the ones who weren't kind? They revealed themselves completely. Because people show you who they really are when they think you don't matter. Clara kept her head down and her eyes open. She studied people the way her father studied case law, carefully, thoroughly, looking for the truth beneath the surface. She didn't judge them out loud. Didn't gossip with coworkers about the rude businessman in the expensive suit or the woman who yelled about oat milk. She just filed it away. Quiet observations stored in a mind that was sharper than anyone suspected. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job? Share your story below. Her father didn't know about the coffee shop at first. Clara told him she had a scholarship covering most of her expenses, which was technically true, and worked a flexible part-time job. He was proud of her independence, proud that she wanted to earn her own way. When he finally found out, months later, he tried to talk her into quitting. Mija, you don't need to do this, he said, concern creasing his forehead. Let me help. That's what fathers are for. But Clara shook her head, that same quiet strength in her eyes. Papa, I need to do this myself. When I stand in a courtroom one day, I want to know I earned it. Every single step. Raphael looked at his daughter, 24 years old, working herself to exhaustion, refusing help out of principle, and his heart swelled with pride and worry in equal measure. You're more like me than I realized, he said softly. Clara smiled. I learned from the best. But neither of them knew in that moment that her choice to work at that coffee shop would lead to something neither could have predicted. Because fate has a way of weaving threads we can't see until the pattern reveals itself. And the pattern was about to become very clear. The rain came down like punishment that Tuesday morning. Clara was already running late, her umbrella bent from fighting the wind, her shoes soaked through by the time she pushed through the coffee shop door. The warmth inside hit her like a wall, steam rising from the espresso machines, the smell of fresh ground beans thick in the air. Sorry, she called to Marcus, her coworker, not the lawyer, who was already behind the counter, looking stressed. The subway was a nightmare. Don't worry about it, Marcus said, but his eyes said otherwise. The morning rush was coming, and they both knew it. The flood of executives and office workers who needed their caffeine fix before facing another day in their corporate towers. Clara tied her apron, pulled her hair back, and took her position at the register. Smiled at the first customer. Took their order. Made change. Moved to the next. The rhythm was familiar. Comfortable, even. Order, make, serve, repeat. Her hands knew the movements without thinking. Her brain could drift to her case studies while her body did the work. Until the door slammed open hard enough to make the bell above it scream. Victor Langford stormed in like a hurricane in a suit. Clara didn't know his name yet. Didn't know about his empire or his billions or his reputation for crushing anyone who stood in his way. All she saw was a man in an expensive suit, tie hanging loose, phone pressed to his ear, fury radiating off him like heat. I don't care what the contractor says, Victor snarled into the phone. Tell him he's got 24 hours to fix it, or I'll bury him in lawsuits so deep his grandchildren will still be paying lawyers. He didn't wait in line. Just walked straight to the counter, cutting in front of an elderly woman who'd been waiting patiently. The woman opened her mouth to protest, but something in Victor's face made her step back. Clara's smile stayed fixed in place, but something cold settled in her stomach. She'd seen men like this before. Men who thought the world rearranged itself around their convenience. "I'll be right with you, sir," she said politely, finishing the previous order. Victor's eyes snapped to her like a snake spotting prey. "No, you'll be with me now." The coffee shop went quiet. Other customers pretended not to notice, suddenly fascinated with their phones. Clara's hands stilled. She looked at Victor, really looked at him, and saw everything she needed to know in that moment. The expensive watch. The Italian leather shoes. The way he stood like he owned the floor beneath his feet. And the complete absence of anything resembling basic human decency. "I understand you're in a hurry, sir," Clara said, her voice calm and steady despite the anger building in her chest. "But there are other customers ahead of you. I'll take your order as soon as—" "Do you know who I am?" Victor's voice cut through the air like a knife. Clara's jaw tightened. "No, sir." "Should I?" "Wrong answer." Victor's face flushed red. The phone call was forgotten, dropped from his ear as he leaned across the counter. "Victor Langford. Langford Enterprises. The building 3 blocks from here? I own it. And about 6 others in this city. So when I walk into a coffee shop, I don't wait." Silence crashed through the room like broken glass. Clara felt every eye on her. Felt Marcus freeze beside her. Felt the weight of this moment pressing down like a physical thing. She could have backed down. Should have, maybe. Could have apologized, taken his order, let him leave with his pride intact and her paycheck secure. But something in his eyes, that absolute certainty that he was better than her, that she existed only to serve him, made something snap into place inside Clara's chest. "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir," she said quietly. "But everyone waits their turn here. I'll be happy to take your order in just a moment." Victor's eyes went wide. For a second, Clara thought he might actually explode. His face turned a deeper shade of red. His hands gripped the counter edge so hard his knuckles went white. "Are you kidding me right now?" His voice climbed higher. "Do you have any idea how much money I spend in this city? How many people work for me? And you, a barista, are telling me to wait." "Sir, please." "No." Victor's shout made people flinch. "You don't get to, sir, me after disrespecting me. What's your name?" "I'm calling your manager. Better yet, I'm buying this entire coffee shop chain and having you fired before lunch." Clara's heart hammered, but her voice stayed level. "My name is Clara. And I'm just doing my job, sir. Your job is to serve customers, not lecture them." Victor was fully shouting now, spittle flying. "Triple espresso. No foam. Extra hot. And, I swear to God, if you screw it up, I'll—" He caught himself. Barely. The threat hung in the air, unfinished but understood. Clara turned to make his drink, her hands shaking now but still functioning. The espresso machine hissed and groaned. And naturally, because the universe has a sense of humor, it chose that exact moment to sputter. A delay. 30 seconds, maybe less. But for Victor Langford, it might as well have been an eternity. What would you do if someone treated you like this at work? Comment below. Are you incompetent? The word exploded from Victor's mouth like a bomb. "Do you even know how to work that machine? People like you," he gestured at her, at the apron, at everything she was. "People like you waste oxygen. You take up space that could be used by people who actually matter." The coffee shop was a tomb. No one moved. No one breathed. Clara felt the words land like physical blows. Felt them try to burrow into her skin, into her sense of self, into the quiet pride she'd built over years of hard work and humility. But she was Rafael Moreno's daughter. And she'd been raised to stand tall even when storms tried to knock her down. Clara finished making his coffee. Hands steady despite everything. She placed it on the counter with care, met his eyes without flinching, and said in a voice that carried more strength than any shout, "Here's your order, sir. I hope your day gets better." Victor stared at her. For a moment, Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or the tiniest hint of shame. Then it was gone. He grabbed the cup, threw a crumpled $100 bill on the counter without looking at it, and stormed toward the door. "Keep the change," he sneered over his shoulder. "You'll need it more than I do." The door slammed behind him, the bell ringing like a death knell. Clara stood there, the $100 bill sitting on the counter like evidence of a crime. Around her, the coffee shop slowly came back to life. Customers whispered. Marcus touched her shoulder gently. "Clara, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" She nodded, even though she wasn't. Even though her hands were shaking and her throat was tight and her eyes burned with tears, she refused to let fall. "I'm fine," she whispered. But she wasn't fine. Because Victor Langford had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd humiliated the wrong woman. 3 weeks can feel like an eternity or a heartbeat, depending on what they hold. For Victor Langford, those 3 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, deals, and the comfortable rhythm of power. The coffee shop incident disappeared from his mind within hours. Just another tantrum, another nobody put in their place. He didn't give Clara a second thought. Why would he? She was nothing. A blip. A barista who'd briefly annoyed him on a bad morning. But the universe was keeping score. And the bill was coming due. It started small. A lawsuit filed by Henderson Properties, claiming breach of contract on a real estate deal. Victor's lawyers assured him it was routine. Nuisance litigation from a competitor trying to squeeze money out of a settlement. "We'll crush them," Marcus, his lawyer this time, not the barista's coworker, said confidently. "They don't have a case. This'll be dismissed before it even sees a courtroom." But it wasn't dismissed. More complaints surfaced. Tenants from 3 different Langford buildings filing grievances about unsafe conditions, ignored maintenance requests, illegal rent increases. Former employees coming forward with stories of hostile work environments and wrongful termination. Suddenly, Victor's empire didn't look so untouchable. The media smelled blood in the water. Headlines started appearing. Billionaire developer faces multiple lawsuits. Victor Langford's business practices under scrutiny. Is the real estate mogul's empire built on exploitation? Victor's PR team went into overdrive. Damage control. Carefully worded statements. Threats to journalists who dug too deep. But the lawsuits kept coming. And they started to stick together, consolidating into something bigger. Something that couldn't be bought or threatened away. Victor's confidence started to crack. "This is coordinated," he told his legal team, pacing his office like a caged animal. "Someone's behind this. Someone's organizing these people against me." His lawyers exchanged glances. "Victor, sometimes lawsuits just happen." "Especially when." "When what?" Victor's voice was sharp. "Dangerous." The lawyer cleared his throat. "When there's merit to the claims." Victor's hand slammed on his desk. "There's no merit. These are lies from people trying to take advantage of my success. And we're going to prove it." But proving it meant going to court. And going to court meant facing a judge. The court assignment came through on a Friday. Victor barely glanced at it. Just another name on another piece of paper. Judge Rafael Moreno. He'd heard the name before. Vaguely. Something about being tough but fair. Incorruptible, they said, like that was supposed to be admirable instead of just annoying. Victor wasn't worried. He'd faced tough judges before. They all had their price, whether they admitted it or not. Money, favors, connections, something always worked. He prepared like he always did. His legal team crafted arguments designed to confuse and overwhelm. They gathered character witnesses, other businessmen, politicians who owed Victor favors, employees who knew better than to speak against him. The strategy was simple: make the case so complicated, so tangled in legal jargon and procedural motions, that the judge would eventually give up and push for a settlement. It had worked before. It would work again. Victor believed this with absolute certainty right up until the moment he walked through that courtroom door and saw her face. The barista. Sitting in the gallery. Watching him with those same steady, unshakable eyes. And suddenly, the ground beneath Victor's feet felt like it was crumbling. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your past actions were about to catch up with you? Tell us in the comments. Marcus, Victor hissed his lawyer, unable to look away from Clara. Find out who that woman is. Now. His lawyer followed his gaze, confused. The woman in the navy dress? Why? What? Just do it. Victor's voice cracked with panic he couldn't hide. Around him, the whispers were growing. People noticing his reaction. Noticing Clara. The reporters in the back pulling out their phones, fingers flying across screens. And then the bailiff called for everyone to rise. And Judge Rafael Moreno entered the courtroom. And the pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The judge's eyes, they were Clara's eyes. The same shade, the same quiet strength. The way he glanced at her, just for a heartbeat, with paternal warmth before his expression hardened back into professional neutrality. The way she sat, back straight, hands folded, like she belonged exactly where she was. Oh God. Victor's throat closed. His vision blurred at the edges. The room tilted. The barista he'd humiliated, the woman he'd told wasted oxygen, the person he'd dismissed as nothing. She was the judge's daughter. And her father held Victor's entire future in his hands. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Order, Judge Moreno's voice cut through the chaos of whispers. This court will come to order. Victor couldn't breathe. His chest felt like someone had wrapped iron bands around it and was tightening them with each passing second. The courtroom settled into silence, but inside his head, everything was screaming. This can't be happening. This cannot be happening. His lawyer was furiously typing something on his tablet, probably trying to research if they could request a different judge. But Victor already knew the answer. You didn't just ask for a new judge because you'd been an asshole to his daughter. That wasn't grounds for recusal. That was just called consequences. Judge Moreno adjusted his reading glasses, looking down at the papers before him with the careful attention of a surgeon examining an X-ray. When he spoke, his voice was measured, professional, giving away nothing. We are here today regarding the consolidated cases against Langford Enterprises and its CEO, Victor Langford. The plaintiffs allege breach of contract, fraudulent business practices, unsafe living conditions in multiple properties, and various labor violations. Mr. Langford, you understand the charges against you. Victor's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, my client understands the allegations and denies them categorically. These cases are a coordinated attack on a successful businessman by individuals seeking financial gain through. I asked Mr. Langford, Judge Moreno interrupted, his eyes moving to Victor. Does your client speak, counselor, or shall I assume he's unable to answer simple questions? It was a trap. Victor knew it was a trap. Stay silent and look weak. Speak and risk saying something stupid while his brain was still spinning. He stood on shaky legs. I understand the charges, Your Honor. And they're false. That's what we're here to determine. Judge Moreno's gaze was steady, unreadable. If he felt anything about seeing the man who'd humiliated his daughter standing in his courtroom, his face didn't show it. And somehow, that made it worse. Victor sat back down, his expensive suit suddenly feeling too tight. He risked another glance at Clara. She hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, just sat there like a statue carved from judgment itself. The plaintiff's attorney stood, a sharp woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Your Honor, if I may, we'd like to begin with testimony from Mrs. Dolores Reyes, a tenant in one of Mr. Langford's properties who has documented months of ignored maintenance requests, including a broken heating system during winter months. Proceed, Judge Moreno said. And so it began. Mrs. Reyes took the stand, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and work-worn hands. She spoke quietly at first, but as she told her story, her voice grew stronger. The apartment with no heat. The 3-year-old grandson who got pneumonia. The requests that went unanswered. The rent that kept going up while the building crumbled. Victor's lawyers objected at every opportunity. Hearsay. Speculation. Irrelevant to the contract claims. But Judge Moreno overruled most of them. I'll allow it. The witness may continue. And Mrs. Reyes continued. Others followed. A maintenance worker fired for reporting code violations. a small business owner whose commercial lease was terminated without cause after refusing to pay bribes, a former employee who'd been threatened into signing a non-compete agreement that effectively ended her career. Each testimony was a nail. Each document was a hammer. And Victor's carefully constructed empire started to sound less like success and more like exploitation. Would you speak up against a powerful person if you knew it might cost you everything? Comment your thoughts. During a brief recess, Victor cornered his legal team in the hallway outside the courtroom. "This is a disaster," he hissed, low enough that nearby reporters couldn't hear. "That judge is letting them say whatever they want. He's not even trying to be fair." Marcus, his lead attorney, looked exhausted. "Victor, he's actually being completely by the book. Everything he's allowed is standard procedure. The problem isn't the judge. The problem is the testimony is damaging and we don't have strong counterarguments because he stopped himself." "Because what?" Victor's voice was dangerous. Marcus met his eyes. "Because some of it is true." The words hung in the air like poison gas. "How dare you?" Victor started, but Marcus cut him off. "I'm not saying all of it. But we've discussed this before. Some of your business practices are aggressive. Some of your contracts have clauses that are legally questionable. And the maintenance issues? Victor, I've seen the records. There are legitimate complaints that were ignored." Victor's face flushed. "I pay you to defend me, not lecture me." "And I'm trying to defend you," Marcus shot back, his own frustration showing now. "But you need to understand what we're up against. That judge in there? He's got a reputation for seeing through bullshit. He's not going to be swayed by your money or your connections. And if we don't adjust our strategy..." "The strategy is fine," Victor interrupted. "The judge is biased. His daughter..." "Don't." Marcus's voice went sharp. "Do not finish that sentence. You are rude to a service worker. That doesn't create judicial bias. And if you try to make that argument, you'll only make things worse." Victor wanted to argue. Wanted to rage. Wanted to fire Marcus on the spot and find a lawyer who would tell him what he wanted to hear. But somewhere in the back of his mind, past the panic and the pride, a small voice whispered, "What if he's right?" The recess ended. They filed back into the courtroom. Clara was already in her seat, calm as still water. And Judge Moreno's gavel fell again, sealing Victor's fate one testimony at a time. The afternoon session was worse. Victor sat at the defense table, his tie feeling like a noose, watching his empire get dissected piece by piece. The plaintiff's attorneys were good, too good. They had documents, emails, recorded phone calls, a paper trail that painted Victor not as a successful businessman, but as a bully in an expensive suit. And through it all, Clara sat in the gallery, silent, watchful, present. Victor couldn't stop looking at her. It was like his eyes were magnets and she was north. Every time he glanced over, she was there. Sometimes she was taking notes in a small leather journal. Sometimes she was just listening, her face thoughtful. She never looked angry. Never looked smug or satisfied. She looked sad. Like she was watching something tragic unfold and wished it could have gone differently. That look infuriated him more than anger would have. The testimony shifted to employment practices. A former executive assistant, someone Victor barely remembered, took the stand. She was young, maybe 25, and her hands trembled as she was sworn in. "Please state your name for the record," the plaintiff's attorney said gently. "Jennifer Kim. And you worked for Mr. Langford's company?" "Yes. For 2 years. I was his personal assistant." "Can you describe your work environment?" Jennifer's voice was soft, but it carried. It was intense. Mr. Langford demanded availability 24/7. If he called at 2 in the morning, you answered. If he needed something on Sunday, you dropped everything. There were no boundaries. And if you didn't meet these demands, he'd scream. Sometimes in front of other employees. Call you stupid, incompetent. Threaten to make sure you never worked in the industry again. Her voice cracked. "I developed panic attacks. Started taking medication just to get through the workday." Victor's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, the witness's medical conditions are not relevant to..." "I'll allow it," Judge Moreno said. "Continue, Ms. Kim." Jennifer told her story. The impossible demands. The verbal abuse. The day she finally broke down crying in the office bathroom and decided she couldn't do it anymore. When she gave notice, Victor had her escorted from the building by security and refused to provide a reference, effectively blackballing her in the industry. "Do you see Mr. Langford in the courtroom today?" the attorney asked. Jennifer's eyes found Victor. He stared back, trying to look intimidating, trying to make her falter. She didn't. "Yes, that's him. Thank you, Miss Kim. No further questions." Victor's lawyer stood for cross-examination, but the damage was done. He tried to poke holes in her story, suggested she was exaggerating, implied she was after money, questioned her work performance. But Jennifer held steady. And Judge Marino's face remained impassive, taking it all in. When Jennifer stepped down, she walked past the defense table. For just a moment, her eyes met Victor's. And he saw something there that made his stomach turn. Not hatred. Not even anger. Pity. Have you ever stood up to someone who made you feel small? Share your story below. The pattern continued. Witness after witness. Each one adding another layer to a picture Victor didn't recognize. Was this really how people saw him? Was this really who he'd become? No. No, they were lying. Exaggerating. Trying to take him down because they were jealous of his success. But even as he told himself this, doubt crept in like water through cracks. The courtroom walls seemed to close in. The air felt thick. Victor's collar was damp with sweat despite the air conditioning. Around him, the reporters were practically salivating. This wasn't just a trial anymore. This was a story. Billionaire CEO exposed as a tyrant. The kind of narrative that sold papers and generated clicks. And Clara just kept sitting there, witnessing, judging in her silence. During another brief break, Victor made a decision born of desperation. He approached her. His lawyers tried to stop him. Marcus literally grabbed his arm. "Victor, don't. This is a terrible idea." Victor shook him off. "I'm just going to talk to her." "That's what I'm afraid of," Marcus muttered, but Victor was already moving. Clara looked up as he approached, her expression guarded but not hostile. Up close, she looked even younger than he remembered. But her eyes carried something old, wisdom or weariness or both. "Can we talk?" Victor asked, his voice low. Clara glanced at the courtroom doors where her father would soon return. "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Langford. Please." The word felt foreign in his mouth. "Just for a minute." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "1 minute." Victor sat in the row behind her, leaning forward so they could speak quietly. "I know what you're thinking. About the coffee shop. That morning. I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you. That wasn't right." Clara turned slightly to look at him. "Is that an apology?" "Yes." The word came out defensive instead of remorseful. "I'm apologizing." "Interesting." Clara's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. "Because it doesn't sound like an apology. It sounds like you're trying to manage damage control." Victor's jaw clenched. "I'm trying to make things right." "Are you?" Clara's eyes searched his. "Or are you trying to make me disappear again? Trying to erase the fact that you humiliated a stranger for no reason other than you could?" "I didn't." Victor stopped. Because he had. He absolutely had. Clara's expression softened slightly, but not with kindness. With something worse. Understanding. "Mr. Langford, I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to influence my father or sabotage your case. I'm here because I'm a law student and this is an important case study. My father doesn't need my help to see who you are. Your actions speak loud enough on their own." "You don't know me," Victor said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I know exactly who you are." Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "You're a man who measures people by what they can do for you. Who treats kindness like weakness and power like a right instead of a responsibility. You're not a villain, Mr. Langford. You're just a man who forgot that other people matter." The words hit harder than any testimony had. "That's not fair," Victor whispered. "No," Clara agreed. "What's not fair is the tenant who couldn't heat her apartment. The assistant who developed panic attacks. The worker who was fired for doing the right thing. That's not fair." Before Victor could respond, the bailiff announced the judge's return. Clara turned away from him, her back straight, her message delivered. And Victor walked back to his table feeling more exposed than he'd ever felt in his life. Because for the first time, someone had held up a mirror. And he didn't like what he saw. The headlines hit before the trial day even ended. Social media exploded first, because that's how shame spreads in the modern world. Fast. Viral. Merciless. Someone had leaked the story. Maybe a reporter. Maybe someone in the courtroom. Maybe just someone who'd been at that coffee shop 3 weeks ago and finally connected the dots. Breaking. Billionaire CEO Victor Langford on trial. The judge's daughter is the barista he humiliated. It was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of poetic justice that people couldn't resist sharing. Within hours, it was everywhere. Twitter erupted. Reddit threads multiplied like weeds. TikTok videos dissecting the story got millions of views. News outlets picked it up, each one adding their own spin. Karma comes for billionaire who told barista she wastes oxygen. From coffee counter to courtroom, judge's daughter watches father preside over bully's trial. Victor Langford's empire crumbles after humiliating wrong woman. The photos started circulating. Blurry courtroom sketches at first, then actual photos taken despite the no-camera rules. Victor's face, pale and sweating. Clara sitting calmly in the gallery. Judge Moreno, stern and unmoved. Public opinion formed fast and hard. Victor's social media accounts, managed by his PR team, were flooded with comments. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. This is what happens when you treat people like garbage. Imagine being so arrogant you insult a judge's daughter and don't even realize it. I hope they take everything from him. People like you waste oxygen. The phrase became a meme, thrown back at Victor over and over like a boomerang made of his own cruelty. The few defenders he had were drowned out. Maybe we should hear both sides. Innocent until proven guilty. The trial isn't over yet. But the court of public opinion didn't need to wait for a verdict. Victor's business started feeling the impact immediately. Partnerships dissolved. Investors quietly distanced themselves. Clients called to postpone meetings that would never be rescheduled. His phone, usually ringing constantly with opportunities and deals, went silent. The only calls coming through were from reporters he refused to answer and board members demanding explanations he couldn't provide. Have you ever watched someone's reputation collapse in real time? What did it teach you? By evening, Victor sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt empty. The city stretched out below him, millions of lights, millions of people, and he'd never felt more isolated. His PR team had sent an email. Suggested statements. Damage control strategies. But they all felt hollow. What could he possibly say? Sorry I was mean to a barista? I promise I'm not usually a complete monster. He poured himself a drink. Then another. Then stopped counting. The television played news coverage on mute. His face appeared on screen over and over. The cheer-ins were brutal. Billionaire's bad behavior catches up with him. Victor Langford, from mogul to meme. His phone buzzed. A text from someone he'd considered a friend. Business associate, at least. Hey man, I think we need to postpone our golf game. Indefinitely. You understand. Victor understood perfectly. He was toxic now. Radioactive. Everyone who'd smiled at his parties and laughed at his jokes and taken his money was suddenly unavailable. Busy. Sorry, let's rain check. The thing about building an empire on fear and money is that neither buys loyalty. Fear disappears the moment you look weak. Money flows wherever the returns are best. And right now, Victor Langford was neither feared nor a good investment. He was just a man in an expensive apartment, watching his world burn on social media. The hate was expected. But what hurt worse, what Victor couldn't quite process, were the stories. People he didn't know. People he'd never met. Sharing their own experiences with bosses like him. With rich people who'd treated them like dirt. With men in expensive suits who thought their bank accounts made them better than everyone else. This happened to me once. A CEO threw coffee at me because it wasn't hot enough. I was 17. My former boss used to scream that we were all replaceable. That we should be grateful for our minimum wage jobs. This story feels personal. I worked as a housekeeper for a billionaire. He literally never learned my name. Called me the help for 3 years. Story after story. Thousands of them. All variations on the same theme, casual cruelty from people with power toward people without it. And Victor realized something that made him feel sick. He wasn't special. He wasn't uniquely terrible. He was just another asshole in a long line of assholes who'd forgotten that service workers are human beings. The only difference was he'd gotten caught. His phone buzzed again. His mother, who he hadn't spoken to in months. Usually, he avoided her calls. She always wanted something, or wanted to lecture him about not visiting enough, or wanted to remind him where he came from as if he could forget. But tonight, drunk and alone and drowning, he answered. Victor. Her voice was small. Worried. I saw the news. Of course you did, Victor said. The whole world saw it. Silence on the line. Then, is it true? What they're saying? Did you really talk to that girl like that? Victor closed his eyes. Yeah, Ma. I did. More silence. He could hear her breathing, could imagine her in her small apartment in Newark, the one he'd offered to upgrade 100 times and she'd always refused. I raised you better than that, she said finally. Not angry. Just sad. Disappointed. Which was somehow worse. I know. Your father worked service jobs his whole life, Victor. You remember that? He cleaned offices, washed dishes, drove trucks, and people treated him like he was invisible, like he didn't matter. Her voice cracked. You swore you'd never be like them. You swore. Victor's throat tightened. I'm sorry, Ma. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to that girl. And then apologize to every person you've treated that way. And then, Megiddo, figure out who you really want to be. She hung up. Victor sat in the dark, his mother's words echoing louder than any headline. And somewhere across the city, in a modest apartment in Queens, Clara Moreno sat with her father at their kitchen table. The same table where she'd eaten dinner every night growing up. Where he'd taught her about justice and dignity and standing up for what's right. Are you okay? Raphael asked his daughter, studying her face in the warm kitchen light. Clara nodded. I'm fine, Papa. This must be difficult. Being part of this story. I didn't want to be part of any story, Clara said quietly. I just wanted to do my job. Study my law. Live my life. Raphael reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You handled yourself with grace today. Your mother would be proud. Clara's eyes misted at the mention of her mother, gone 5 years now but still present in every lesson she'd taught. What happens next? Clara asked. Raphael sighed. Justice. Fair and impartial. No matter what he did to you, no matter what people think they want, I have to judge this case on the evidence alone. I know. But Clara. Raphael waited until she met his eyes. What I can promise is this. In my courtroom, everyone is equal. Billionaire or barista. Everyone gets the same measure of justice. Clara smiled. That's all anyone can ask for. But both of them knew that sometimes, equal justice feels like revenge to the people who are used to being above the law. And Victor Langford was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Sleep didn't come easy for Victor that night. He tossed in sheets that cost more than most people's monthly rent, in a bed big enough for 4 people alone. His mind replayed the day over and over. The testimonies. The evidence. Clara's face. His mother's voice. Figure out who you really want to be. At 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went to his home office. Opened his laptop. Made the mistake of checking social media. The hatred had evolved into mockery. Memes of his face with captions. POV, you just realized you insulted the judge's daughter. When you're rich but not rich enough to escape consequences. Gifs of courtroom reactions. He was a joke. A cautionary tale. A punchline. Victor closed the laptop and sat in the dark, surrounded by awards and accolades from a career built on ambition and emptied of compassion. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, he let himself cry. Not because of the trial. Not because his empire was crumbling. Not even because he might lose everything. But because somewhere along the way, he'd become someone his younger self would have hated. The kid from Newark who'd promised himself he'd be different. who'd sworn he'd never forget where he came from, who'd looked at his exhausted parents and vowed to build something better. When had that kid died? When had ambition turned into cruelty? When had success become an excuse to treat people like obstacles instead of human beings? Victor didn't have answers. Just tears. And regret. And the horrible understanding that you can't buy back time or undo the damage of 1,000 careless cruelties. Morning came eventually. Gray light filtered through his windows. Victor showered, shaved, put on another expensive suit. Armor for another day of battle. But his reflection in the mirror looked different. Tired. Older. Lost. When was the last time you took a hard look at who you've become versus who you wanted to be? Comment below. The second day of trial was worse than the first. The evidence was damning. Financial records showing profit margins padded by cutting corners on building safety. Emails where Victor explicitly told managers to ignore tenant complaints unless they were legal threats. Testimony from an engineer who'd been fired for refusing to sign off on substandard construction. Victor's lawyers fought hard. Objected constantly. Cross-examined witnesses with aggressive precision. But they were putting out fires with gasoline. Judge Moreno remained perfectly professional. His rulings were fair, his tone neutral. If anything, he bent over backward to ensure Victor got every benefit of the doubt the law allowed. Which somehow made it worse. Victor wanted bias. Wanted an unfair judge he could blame. Wanted something external to point to and say, see? This isn't about my actions, it's about corruption. But Rafael Moreno gave him nothing. Just cold, impartial justice. Clara continued her quiet vigil in the gallery. Victor tried not to look at her. Failed constantly. During the lunch recess, his legal team had a come-to-Jesus meeting. We need to talk settlement, Marcus said bluntly. Absolutely not. Victor's response was automatic. Victor, listen to me. Marcus leaned forward, exhaustion written in every line of his face. The evidence is overwhelming. The judge is giving us nothing to work with for an appeal. And public opinion has already convicted you. If we go to verdict and lose, when we lose, the damages are going to be catastrophic. We can appeal. On what grounds? Marcus spread his hands. That the judge was fair? That he followed the law? That he gave you every opportunity to defend yourself? Those aren't appealable issues. Another lawyer jumped in. A settlement lets you control the narrative. Spin it as taking responsibility, making things right. Without admitting wrongdoing, we can. I'm not settling. Victor's voice was ice. I'm not giving them the satisfaction. This isn't about satisfaction, Marcus said. This is about survival. Your company stock has dropped 30% in 2 days. Partners are fleeing. If you don't do something to stop the bleeding, then I'll bleed. Victor slammed his hand on the table. I've spent my entire life building this empire. I'm not going to let a bunch of, he caught himself. Almost said something he couldn't take back. The lawyers exchanged glances. A bunch of what, Victor? Marcus asked quietly. Victor said nothing, because any answer would only prove their point. We go back in an hour, Marcus said, gathering his papers. Think about what I said. Think about what you really want the endgame to be here. But Victor had already decided. He'd rather burn than bend. Pride, as I said before, is a hungry thing. And it was eating Victor alive. The afternoon session brought a witness Victor hadn't expected. Robert Chin, former vice president of acquisitions. Someone Victor had considered a friend, or as close to a friend as Victor allowed himself to have. Robert had left the company 6 months earlier. Amicable departure, generous severance, glowing recommendations. Or so Victor had thought. Now Robert sat in the witness box, looking uncomfortable but determined. The plaintiff's attorney approached him carefully. Mr. Chin, how long did you work for Langford Enterprises? 8 years. And in what capacity? I oversaw property acquisitions and development. I reported directly to Mr. Langford. Can you describe the company culture under Mr. Langford's leadership? Robert hesitated. His eyes found Victor's across the courtroom. Something like apology flickered there. Then he spoke. The culture was intense. Mr. Langford demanded results above everything else. Profit margins were the only metric that mattered. If you hit your numbers, you were golden. If you didn't, he trailed off. If you didn't, you were either demoted, humiliated, or fired. Sometimes all three. Victor's hands clenched into fists under the table. Did you ever witness Mr. Langford engage in unethical business practices? Objection. Victor's lawyer was on his feet. Calls for speculation and... I'll rephrase, the attorney interrupted smoothly. Did you ever witness Mr. Langford make business decisions that you believed crossed ethical lines? Robert looked down at his hands. Yes. The courtroom seemed to inhale collectively. Can you give an example? There was a low-income housing development we were acquiring. The tenants had rent-controlled leases. Mr. Langford told me explicitly to find legal loopholes to evict them so we could renovate and raise the rents. When I said that would displace dozens of families, he said. Robert's voice dropped. He said that wasn't our problem. That business wasn't a charity. And did you follow those instructions? At first. I found the loopholes. Started the eviction process. But then I met some of the families. Single mothers. Elderly people on fixed incomes. Veterans. And I realized what we were really doing. Which was choosing profit over people. Every single time. Victor wanted to scream. Wanted to call Robert a traitor. Wanted to remind everyone that business was business and sentiment was for suckers. But the words stuck in his throat. Because Robert was telling the truth. The testimony continued. Example after example. Each one painting Victor not as a criminal, but as something almost worse, a man who'd chosen money over humanity so many times it became habit. When Robert stepped down, he walked past the defense table without looking at Victor. And Victor understood. This wasn't betrayal. This was conscience. Robert had finally chosen the side of his own soul. Would you testify against a former friend if you knew they were in the wrong? Tell us why or why not. The judge called for a brief recess before the final witness of the day. Victor stood on shaky legs, needing air, needing space, needing anything but the suffocating walls of that courtroom. He pushed through the doors and found himself in the hallway outside. Reporters swarmed immediately, shouting questions. Mr. Langford, how do you respond to the allegations? Do you regret how you treated Clara Moreno? Is it true your company is facing bankruptcy? Security pushed them back, creating a small bubble of space. Victor leaned against the wall, loosening his tie, trying to breathe. And then he saw her. Clara stood at the end of the hallway, by a window overlooking the city. She was alone, her back to the chaos, looking out at the skyline with an expression Victor couldn't read. Before he could think better of it, his feet carried him toward her. Please don't, he said when he got close enough. Don't say anything. Just, let me talk. Just for a minute. Clara turned, surprise flickering across her face. She glanced at the reporters being held back by security, then back at Victor. 1 minute, she agreed quietly. Victor searched for words. The right words. Words that could fix this impossible situation. I don't expect you to forgive me, he started. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I need you to know that what I said to you that morning, it wasn't personal. Clara's eyebrows rose slightly. It felt pretty personal. I mean, I didn't know you. You were just someone in the way when I was having a terrible day. And that makes it better? Clara's voice wasn't angry. Just curious. That you treat strangers that way? No. God, no. That makes it worse. Victor ran a hand through his hair, frustration and shame warring in his chest. I'm trying to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not because of the trial or your father or any of this. But because you didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. Clara studied him for a long moment. Do you know what hurt most about that morning, Mr. Langford? Victor shook his head. It wasn't the words. It wasn't the yelling or the humiliation. It was the look in your eyes. Clara's voice was soft but firm. You looked at me like I was nothing. Like I wasn't even human enough to warrant basic respect. And the worst part? I don't think you even realized you were doing it. The words landed like punches. That's who you've become, Clara continued. Someone who's forgotten that every person you meet is someone's daughter. Someone's son. Someone who matters to somebody. I know that, Victor whispered. Do you? Clara challenged. Because knowing something and living it are very different things. Before Victor could respond, a bailiff appeared. Ms. Moreno? Your father asked me to find you. Trials resuming in 5 minutes. Clara nodded, then turned back to Victor one last time. I hope you figure out who you want to be, Mr. Langford, while you still have time to choose. She walked away, leaving Victor alone in the hallway with her words echoing in his head. While you still have time to choose. But as Victor walked back into that courtroom and saw the evidence stacked against him, saw the witnesses lined up to testify, saw his empire crumbling in real time, he wondered if maybe his time had already run out. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. The final days of trial blurred together like a nightmare Victor couldn't wake from. More witnesses. More evidence. More proof of what he'd spent years pretending wasn't true, that his empire was built on the backs of people he'd crushed without a second thought. The prosecution brought documents Victor had forgotten existed. Emails he'd fired off in anger without considering they'd be permanent records. Contracts with fine print designed to trap people. Photos of buildings he owned where families lived in conditions he'd never tolerate for himself. Each piece of evidence was a mirror, and the reflection kept getting uglier. His legal team tried everything. Technical objections. Procedural delays. Character witnesses who testified that Victor donated to charity, though even that backfired when someone pointed out his donations were always tax-deductible and always public. Nothing worked. Judge Moreno ran his courtroom with the precision of a surgeon and the fairness of a saint. Every ruling was justified. Every decision was documented. He gave Victor every legal protection the law allowed. And it still wasn't enough. Because the truth, when you stack it high enough, becomes impossible to deny. Victor stopped sleeping entirely. Stopped eating. His suits hung looser. His face looked gaunt. The billionaire CEO who'd walked into that courtroom with arrogance stitched into his spine now sat hunched and hollow. Clara watched it all with those steady, unreadable eyes. Sometimes Victor caught her looking at him with something that might have been compassion. Other times, she just looked sad. The prosecution rested their case after 4 days of testimony. Victor's lawyers presented their defense, character witnesses who spoke stiffly about his business acumen, expert testimony about industry standards, arguments that aggressive business practices weren't illegal. But it all felt thin. Defensive. Like trying to build a wall out of tissue paper. On the 5th day, both sides gave their closing arguments. The plaintiff's attorney was devastating. She didn't shout or dramatize. She just laid out the facts in clear, simple language that anyone could understand. Victor Langford had a choice, she said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. Every day, he had a choice. To treat people with dignity or dismiss them as obstacles. To honor his contracts or find loopholes. To maintain safe housing or maximize profits. And every day, he chose wrong. She paused, letting the words settle. This case isn't about punishing success. It's about accountability. It's about saying that money doesn't place you above the law. That power doesn't give you permission to harm people. That everyone, billionaire or barista, answers for their actions. Her eyes swept the courtroom, landing briefly on Clara before moving to the jury. The evidence is clear. The testimony is overwhelming. And the question before you is simple. Do we live in a world where people like Victor Langford face consequences? Or do we live in a world where the powerful can do whatever they want, to whomever they want, without ever answering for it? She sat down. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor's attorney stood for his closing. He tried. God, he tried. Talked about reasonable doubt. About the complexity of business. About how success always attracts criticism. But even Victor could hear how hollow it sounded. Do you believe powerful people should face the same consequences as everyone else? Let us know in the comments. When both sides finished, Judge Moreno addressed the jury with instructions. His voice was calm, authoritative, fair. He explained the law, outlined what they needed to consider, reminded them that their duty was to justice, not emotion. Then he dismissed them to deliberate. And the waiting began. Victor sat in a conference room with his legal team, but he couldn't focus on their words. They were already talking about appeals, about damage control, about next steps. But Victor was thinking about Clara's words from the hallway. Figure out who you want to be, while you still have time to choose. Did he still have time? Or had the jury already decided his fate? Hours passed. Victor paced. Checked his phone. Paced more. The walls seemed to close in with every minute that ticked by. And then, after 6 hours of deliberation, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. Victor's heart stopped. His hands went numb. This was it. The moment everything either held together or fell completely apart. They filed back into the courtroom. Victor took his seat, his legs barely supporting his weight. The jury box filled with 12 faces that held his future in their collective hands. Clara sat in her usual spot in the gallery. Their eyes met for just a moment. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at him with that same quiet strength that had been there since the beginning. Judge Moreno entered. Everyone rose. Everyone sat. The ritual of justice playing out in its ancient, careful dance. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Moreno asked. The foreperson stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and iron in her spine. We have, Your Honor. Please announce your verdict. The courtroom held its breath. In the matter of Henderson Properties versus Langford Enterprises, we find for the plaintiffs. The words crashed through the room like thunder. In the matter of Reyes versus Langford Enterprises, we find for the plaintiffs. Victor's vision blurred. In the matter of Chin versus Langford Enterprises, we find for the plaintiffs. Case after case. Plaintiff after plaintiff. Guilty. 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 Not in the criminal sense, this was civil court. But guilty in the way that mattered. Liable. Responsible. Accountable. The damages were announced. Numbers so large Victor's brain couldn't process them. Millions. Tens of millions. Compensation for every person he'd harmed. Punitive damages designed to send a message. His empire wouldn't survive this. Couldn't survive this. Everything he'd built was crumbling, and this time, there was no way to stop it. The gavel fell. Court is adjourned. And, just like that, it was over. The courtroom emptied slowly, people filing out with whispers and sideways glances at Victor. Reporters rushed to break the news. Lawyers packed their briefcases. The jury dispersed, their duty done. Victor sat frozen at the defense table. His lawyers were talking, their voices urgent, but the words might as well have been in another language. Something about appeals. About bankruptcy protection. About strategies for minimizing the damage. But Victor wasn't listening. He was watching Clara. She stood in the gallery, gathering her things with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown behind the coffee counter. Her father approached her, and they spoke briefly, a father checking on his daughter, a judge making sure she was okay. Rafael Moreno had done his job. Fairly. Completely. By the book. And in doing so, he dismantled Victor's empire without ever showing a hint of bias or personal vendetta. That was true justice. Cold. Impartial. Unbending. Clara hugged her father, then turned to leave. As she walked toward the courtroom doors, she passed within a few feet of Victor. She stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Victor thought about speaking. Thought about apologizing again. Thought about saying something, anything, that might make this moment less devastating. But Clara spoke first. I'm sorry it ended this way, she said quietly. I really am. And Victor could see she meant it. There was no triumph in her eyes. No satisfaction. Just genuine sadness for a man who'd destroyed himself. Why? Victor's voice came out hoarse. Why are you sorry? I did this to myself. Because I've learned that watching someone fall is never as satisfying as people think it will be, Clara said. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about balance. And balance sometimes means everyone loses something. What did you lose? Victor asked. Clara's smile was sad. The belief that people can't change. I keep hoping you'll prove me wrong. She walked away then, leaving Victor sitting in the wreckage of his life. His lawyers finally penetrated his fog. Victor, we need to go. The reporters outside are going to be savage. We need to get you out through the back. But Victor shook his head. No. I'll walk out the front. That's not a good idea. They'll tear you apart. Let them, Victor said. I've been hiding from consequences my whole life. Not today. He stood, straightened his tie, and walked toward the front doors of the courthouse. Would you face the public after losing everything, or would you hide? Tell us what you'd do. The steps outside were packed. Reporters. Cameras. Microphones thrust forward like weapons. The noise hit Victor like a physical wall. Mr. Langford, how do you feel about the verdict? Will you appeal? What do you say to the people you harmed? Is your company finished? Victor stopped at the top of the steps. His security tried to push him forward, but he held up a hand. I have something to say. The crowd quieted, shocked that he was actually going to speak. Victor looked out at the sea of faces. People who hated him. People who'd celebrated his downfall. People who'd been waiting for this moment. And he told them the truth. The verdict was fair, he said, his voice carrying across the steps. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I was treated unfairly. I wasn't. Judge Moreno conducted that trial by the book. The jury heard the evidence and made their decision based on facts. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. The world was watching. I built a business empire, and I told myself that made me successful. But I built it by forgetting something important, that every person I stepped on to get there was somebody's child. Somebody's parent. Somebody who mattered. His throat tightened, but he pushed on. 3 weeks ago, I humiliated a young woman for no reason other than I could. She was just trying to do her job, and I treated her like she was nothing. And that wasn't an isolated incident. That was who I'd become. Victor's voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want everyone who's watching to know I was wrong. About everything. And if you're someone I hurt over the years, someone I dismissed or belittled or harmed, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Silence fell over the courthouse steps. No one expected this. No one knew what to do with a billionaire actually taking responsibility. My company will probably not survive this. And honestly, maybe it shouldn't. Maybe some empires deserve to fall. Victor took a shaky breath. I just hope that in the rubble, I can find a way to become someone better. Someone my mother could be proud of. Someone I could be proud of. He didn't wait for questions. Just walked down the steps, through the crowd, into a waiting car. And as it pulled away from the courthouse, Victor looked back one last time at the building where his old life had ended. Terrified. Broken. But for the first time in years, honest. The aftermath was brutal. Langford Enterprises filed for bankruptcy within a week. Assets were liquidated. Properties sold. The tower that bore Victor's name was bought by a competitor who immediately changed the signage. Partners vanished. Friends stopped calling. The penthouse had to be sold to pay legal fees and settlements. Victor moved into a modest apartment, 2 bedrooms, old carpet, the kind of place he would have sneered at 6 months ago. It should have felt like rock bottom. But strangely, it felt like relief. The weight of maintaining an empire built on cruelty was gone. The constant fear of being exposed was over. The exhausting performance of being untouchable had ended. Victor was just a man now. Disgraced. Humbled. Broke. But free. He got a job. Not anything glamorous, a position at a small consulting firm helping businesses restructure. It paid a fraction of what he used to make. He had to take the subway like everyone else. Had to budget. Had to live like a normal person. And slowly, very slowly, he started to remember what it felt like to be human. His mother visited. Sat in his small apartment, looking around with tears in her eyes, not from disappointment, but from recognition. This reminds me of where you grew up, she said softly. Yeah, Victor agreed. I'd forgotten what that felt like. And now? Victor considered the question. Now it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like starting over. His mother hugged him. I'm proud of you, Majito. Not for what you built, but for what you're becoming. Those words meant more than any magazine cover ever had. Have you ever had to start over completely? How did it change you? Share your story below. The public's attention eventually moved on. New scandals emerged. New villains appeared. Victor became yesterday's news, forgotten by everyone except the people he'd harmed. And that's where the real work began. Victor started reaching out. To former employees. To tenants. To everyone he could find who'd been hurt by his actions. Most ignored him. Some told him to leave them alone. A few sent angry responses that Victor read and accepted without defending himself. But some, just a few, responded with something unexpected. Grace. Jennifer Kim, his former assistant, wrote back, "I appreciate the apology. It doesn't fix what happened, but it's a start. I hope you mean it." Mrs. Reyes, the tenant with the grandson who'd gotten pneumonia, sent a short note. "My abuela always said people can change if they want it badly enough. Prove her right, Mr. Langford." Each response, whether angry or gracious, was a gift. Evidence that he was still capable of being seen as human, even by people he'd dehumanized. 6 months after the trial, Victor did something he'd never done before. He volunteered. At a homeless shelter, serving meals. At a legal aid clinic, helping people navigate housing disputes. At a community center, teaching basic financial literacy to people trying to escape poverty. The work was hard. The pay was nothing. But every person he helped, every small kindness he offered, felt like a brick in a new foundation. Not an empire this time. Just a life worth living. One evening, Victor was serving dinner at the shelter when someone got in line who made him freeze. Robert Chin. His former friend. The man who'd testified against him. Robert saw him and stopped too. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the serving counter. Then Robert said, "You work here now?" Victor nodded. "Volunteer. 3 nights a week." "Huh." Robert picked up a tray. "That's good. That's really good, Victor." "I'm sorry," Victor said quietly. "For everything. For putting you in a position where you had to choose between your conscience and your career." Robert's eyes softened. "You're doing the work. That's what matters." They talked briefly as Victor served his food. Not friends again, not yet, maybe not ever. But not enemies either. Just 2 men who'd both made choices and were both living with them. As Robert left, he turned back. "Keep doing this, Victor. Keep showing up. That's how you rebuild trust. One day at a time." Victor nodded, those words settling into his chest like a promise. One day at a time. He could do that. 9 months after the trial, Victor received an invitation that made his hands shake. Clara Moreno's law school graduation ceremony. And attached to it, a note in her handwriting. "Mr. Langford, you don't have to come. But if you do, I'd like to speak with you afterward. Clara." Victor stared at the invitation for days. Why would she want him there? What could she possibly want to say? He almost didn't go. Almost threw the invitation away and pretended he never received it. But Clara had shown him grace when she didn't have to. The least he could do was show up. The ceremony was held at a beautiful auditorium, filled with proud families and excited graduates. Victor sat in the back, trying to be invisible, feeling like an intruder in a celebration he had no right to witness. When Clara's name was called, she walked across the stage with quiet confidence. No arrogance. No showboating. Just steady, earned pride. Her father presented her diploma. Judge Moreno had been asked to do the honor for his daughter. The look on his face as he hugged her made Victor's throat tight. That's what success looked like. Not buildings or bank accounts, but a father's pride in a daughter who'd chosen integrity over everything else. After the ceremony, as families celebrated with flowers and photographs, Victor waited near the entrance, uncertain if Clara had even meant the invitation. Then she appeared, still in her graduation gown, searching the crowd until her eyes found him. She walked over, and Victor stood, awkward and nervous in a way he hadn't felt in decades. "You came," Clara said. "You invited me. I'm still not sure why." Clara smiled. "Can we walk?" They left the celebration behind, walking through the campus quad as the sun set. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about that day in the coffee shop." Victor winced. "I think about it every day." "I don't tell you that to make you feel guilty," Clara said. "I tell you because I've been studying restorative justice in school. The idea that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about healing. Making things right." "I don't know if I can make anything right," Victor said quietly. "Maybe not completely," Clara agreed. "But you can try. And from what I've heard, you have been trying." Victor looked at her surprised. "You've been keeping track of me? I heard you're volunteering. Working at a small firm. Living modestly." Actually trying to help people instead of exploiting them. Clara's expression was thoughtful. That takes courage. Real courage. Not the fake kind that comes from money and power. Do you believe people can truly change, or do they just pretend? Comment your honest opinion below. They walked in silence for another moment before Clara stopped, turning to face him fully. I wanted to tell you something, Mr. Langford. That day in court, when the verdict came down, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Because I saw a man who'd wasted so much potential on the wrong things. I was that man, Victor said. I might still be that man. No. Clara's voice was firm. That man wouldn't be here. That man wouldn't volunteer at shelters. That man wouldn't have given that speech on the courthouse steps. You're becoming someone different. Someone better. Victor's eyes burned. I don't deserve your forgiveness. It's not about deserving, Clara said gently. Forgiveness isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a gift that frees both people. And I'm choosing to give it to you. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. Clara, I forgive you, she said simply. For the coffee shop. For the cruelty. For everything. And I hope you can forgive yourself too. Because that's the only way you'll truly change. Victor couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. The weight he'd been carrying for months, the shame, the guilt, the self-hatred suddenly felt lighter. Not gone, but manageable. Thank you, he whispered. I don't know what else to say except thank you. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. I'm starting at a legal aid clinic next month. We help low-income families with housing disputes, wrongful evictions, contract issues. The kind of cases where regular people get crushed by powerful landlords and corporations. She handed him the envelope. We need volunteers. People who understand the business side. Who can spot the loopholes and explain the contracts. I thought maybe. Victor opened the envelope. It was information about the clinic. Contact details. Volunteer application. You want me to help? Victor's voice cracked. I want you to use everything you learned, all that knowledge about real estate and contracts and business, for good this time, Clara said. You know how people like your old self operate. You could help us fight them. I'd be honored, Victor managed. Truly honored. Clara smiled. Good. Because we have about 300 cases and not enough hands. They shook on it. Not as victim and perpetrator. Not as judge's daughter and disgraced CEO. As equals. As allies. As two people choosing to build something better from the ruins of something broken. As they walked back toward the celebration, Clara said, You know what the best part of justice is, Mr. Langford? What's that? It doesn't just punish the guilty. It offers them a chance to make amends. To become part of the solution instead of the problem. She looked at him with those steady eyes. That chance is yours now. What you do with it is up to you. Victor nodded, understanding the weight of that gift. He'd been given something few people got, a second chance to choose who he wanted to be. And this time, he was going to choose better. 1 year after the trial, Victor stood in front of a familiar building. The coffee shop. The same one where it all began. He'd walked past it dozens of times over the months, always on the other side of the street, never brave enough to go inside. But today was different. Today was the anniversary of his fall. And his beginning. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The smell of espresso and fresh pastries filled the air. A few customers sat at tables, working on laptops or reading newspapers. Normal people living normal lives. Behind the counter was Marcus, the same coworker who'd been there the day Victor had his meltdown. He looked up, and recognition flashed across his face. Mr. Langford, Marcus said carefully. Can I help you? Just Victor, Victor said. Please. And yes, I'd like a coffee. Whatever you recommend. Marcus studied him for a moment, probably wondering if this was some kind of trap. Then he nodded. Coming up. As Marcus made the drink, Victor looked around the shop. This place had been the catalyst. The moment where his arrogance finally caught up with him. If he'd treated Clara with even basic respect that day, his entire life might be different. His empire might still be standing. His reputation intact. His wealth untouched. But would he be better? The honest answer was no. Marcus handed him the coffee. Latte with oat milk. On the house. No, Victor said, pulling out his wallet. Let me pay. And, can I give you this? He handed Marcus a $100 bill along with payment for the coffee. Sir, I can't. It's not a tip, Victor interrupted. It's an apology. For being the kind of customer who made your job hell. For treating you and everyone who works here like we were better than you. He met Marcus's eyes. I'm sorry. Truly. Marcus looked at the bill, then at Victor. You really mean that? I do. Then keep your 100, Marcus said, handing it back. The apology is enough. Actually hearing someone like you say sorry? That's rarer than you'd think. They shook hands. Just two men acknowledging each other's humanity. Victor took his coffee to a corner table and sat down. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes app where he'd been keeping a journal. Writing down thoughts. Tracking his progress. Holding himself accountable. He typed, 1 year since the trial. 1 year since I lost everything. 1 year since I started becoming someone I can respect. What's one moment in your life that completely changed your direction? Share it in the comments. Your story might inspire someone who needs it. The door chimed again. Victor looked up, and his breath caught. Clara walked in. She looked professional now, in a suit that said lawyer instead of law student. Her hair was pulled back, her expression focused. She was meeting a client, clearly, a young woman who looked nervous and grateful in equal measure. Clara saw him. For a moment, surprise crossed her face. Then she smiled. Just a small one. An acknowledgement. Maybe even approval. She didn't come over. Didn't interrupt her client meeting. Just that one small smile before she turned her attention to the person who needed her help. And Victor understood. That smile said, you're doing it. Keep going. He stayed for an hour, watching Clara work. Watching her explain something to her client with patience and clarity. Watching her take notes, ask questions, treat this anxious young woman with the same dignity she'd shown him even when he didn't deserve it. This was who Clara had always been. Someone who saw people, really saw them, and treated them like they mattered. And Victor was finally learning to do the same. As he left the coffee shop, he paused at the counter. Marcus looked up. Same time next week? Victor asked. You coming back? If that's okay. I live near here now. Thought I'd make this my regular spot. Marcus grinned. Welcome back, Victor. Try not to yell at anyone this time. Deal. Outside, the city moved around him. Millions of people rushing to jobs and homes and lives that had nothing to do with him. Once, he'd seen them all as obstacles or opportunities. Now he just saw them as people. Each one somebody's daughter. Somebody's son. Somebody who mattered. Victor's phone buzzed. A text from the legal aid clinic Clara worked at. Another case. A family facing eviction needed help understanding their lease. Could he come in tomorrow? He typed back, I'll be there. Because this was his life now. Not building empires. But helping people one case at a time. Not seeking power. But offering service. Not climbing higher. But lifting others up. Was it everything he'd once dreamed of? No. Was it worth more? Absolutely. Victor Langford had lost his billions. His empire. His reputation. Everything he thought defined him. And in losing it all, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. His humanity. His purpose. Himself. So, what's the moral of the story, my dear? It's simple and it's hard and it's everything. The person you dismiss today might hold your tomorrow in their hands. But more importantly, every person you meet, no matter their job, their status, or their place in the world, deserves your respect. Not because of what they can do for you, but because they're human. And being human means being worthy of dignity. Victor learned this lesson the hard way. Through public humiliation. Through loss. Through having to rebuild himself from nothing. But he learned it. And here's the beautiful, terrible truth. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like transformation. Sometimes the scales balance not by tearing someone down, but by giving them the chance to build themselves back up better this time. Clara could have gloated. Could have celebrated Victor's downfall. Could have held her grudge forever. Instead, she chose grace. Not because Victor earned it, but because she understood something powerful. Forgiveness isn't about the person who caused harm. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of anger. And Victor? He could have stayed bitter. Could have blamed Clara or her father or the system. Could have spent the rest of his life playing the victim. Instead, he chose accountability. Chose to face his mistakes. Chose to become someone different. That's quiet justice. Not loud. Not vengeful. Just steady, patient, undeniable truth that balances the scales. Remember this, my child. Pride will always fall. Arrogance will always crack. Power built on cruelty will always crumble. But humility? Dignity? Kindness? Those things endure. Be kind to the barista making your coffee. Be respectful to the person cleaning your office. Be decent to everyone you meet, not because they might turn out to be a judge's daughter, but because they're human beings and that's reason enough. And if you've been like Victor, if you've hurt people, dismissed them, treated them as less than, it's not too late. Accountability is always available. Change is always possible. Redemption is always within reach. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it. This is the end of Victor and Clara's story. But it's not the end of the lesson. Carry it with you. Remember that every person you meet is fighting battles you can't see, carrying burdens you can't imagine, deserving respect you might not want to give. And when you're tempted to be cruel, when someone's moving too slow or making a mistake or just existing in your way, remember, they might be someone's Clara, and you might be becoming someone's Victor. Choose better. Choose kindness. Choose to be someone you can respect. Because in the end, that's the only empire worth building. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it touched your heart, moved you, or taught you something, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of your job? Or have you caught yourself treating someone poorly because you thought they didn't matter? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Let's inspire each other to choose kindness. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. We share powerful tales of love, betrayal, justice, and redemption every week. Stories that remind us what it means to be human. Next week, we'll bring you another incredible story, one that will make you laugh, cry, and see the world differently. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, be kind. Choose dignity. And never forget that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. See you in the next story. And thank you, from the bottom of our hearts, for being part of this family.